Your alternative talk radio contact, The Planet, KGRAradio.com.
With infinite complaisance, people went to and fro of the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Welcome to another edition of Into the Fray. First, thanks for being here. If you enjoy ITF, please rate and review it in Apple Podcasts. This helps others find it, which turns into more people with encounters for me to interview. If you'd like more content than the free weekly edition, go to intothefrayradio.com and click Become an Insider. It's only $4.99 a month or $54 for an entire year. And if you have an encounter you'd like to share, email me at shannon@intothefrayradio.com. If you've got shorter stories, feel free to call the hotline, 877-317-9111. You can call that anytime, toll free. My first book, Beyond the Fray Bigfoot, co-authored with best-selling author G. Michael Hoff, is available on Amazon in both paperback and Kindle editions. Once you're finished, please take a moment to leave a rating and review. For signed and personalized copies, send $19.99 via PayPal, free shipping within the U.S. only, to beyondthefrayllc@gmail.com. Besides Beyond the Fray Bigfoot, we now have Beyond the Fray PARAMALGAMATION up for pre-order on Amazon right now. As hinted in the title, of course, it is paranormal stories. All kinds of them. It is an amalgamation. They are extremely difficult to classify in any one category of the paranormal. What is wonderful about this book, it is some of my favorites from the show, plus many will be included that you will have not heard on the show. And if you have any encounters that you'd like in an upcoming volume of Beyond the Fray, shoot me an email, shannon@intothefrayradio.com, or you can even just open your smartphone, talk into any kind of recording app, and email me that file. Be as detailed as you can in your story, of course. Any questions? Again, just email me, shannon@intothefrayradio.com. And last but not least, Jeff and I have created Beyond the Fray Publishing. So, if you've got a book you'd like us to publish for you, send us an email at info@beyondthefraypublishing.com. For general questions and information on us, visit our website, beyondthefraypublishing.com. Books we consider will need to be in the genres cryptid, paranormal, or true crime, both fiction and nonfiction. Thanks again, and that will do it for now. So, on to the show. Well, yeah, let's jump in here. And like I said, wherever you want to start with these stories, but I am excited to hear them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when I emailed you, the main story that was at the front of my mind was a story that I get asked to tell a lot. And it does come from this part of West Virginia, where my wife and I lived for 3 years. I don't really have a category for it. It's odd. I had never really heard anything like it. But this, and let me give you a little bit of background to where we live, because I think setting the context is helpful. When I say that this place is rural, it's extremely rural. 7,500 people in the whole county. The base itself, this Navy base where I worked, it was like 200 active duty personnel in the middle of the woods. And the base was divided into two sites. So there was the administration site where the housing was, the barracks, etc. the commissary, the gym, and I lived and worked there. But a few miles up the road was the operations site of the base, and that was, you had to go through another major security checkpoint to get up there. And at the top of this mountain, and anyone can see this on Google Earth, at the top of this mountain were a bunch of satellite dishes that 150-foot parabolic dish, I think, was the biggest one they had there. And they're listening, and I'm not exactly sure what they're listening for, but that wasn't my job or my business. But anyway, I'll talk more about the base later. But just as I'm describing the base, there is about a 5 or 6 mile stretch of dirt road that runs behind the operations side of the base. And there is nothing back there. Like, there is nothing back there. It's people from that part of the country or from the East Coast, they understand thick, dark hardwood forests. And in West Virginia, there's not a flat place in the state. And so you're in this accordion style mountain range, just driving through the darkness of this forest. But at any rate, the guy who told me this story, I came through the front gate one day, and again, small base is just like a small town. So the guy at the front gate says, "Hey, how you doing?" And I'm sitting there chatting with him because there's no one behind me, wait in line waiting to get on base. And as we're talking, he said, "Hey, did you hear what happened to Stevens last night?" And I said, "No, what happened to Stevens?" He said, you should really ask him." He said, I can't even retell it. He said, "All I'll tell you is that Stevens came back into dispatch in the middle of the night last night, sat down in the corner, and would not talk to anybody until the sun came up." I said, "Well, that's interesting." Okay, so this guy Stevens, though, he was a reservist. So he lived in a nearby town, actually over the border in Virginia. And because he was a reservist, he would drive up to this base, this Navy base in West Virginia at Sugar Grove, and he would drill with us, a weekend here and there in a couple of weeks. Every year he would come up for a couple of weeks to get his time in to drill as a reservist. So the next time Stevens came in, I saw him. I actually worked in the office where he had to come check in. And when I saw him, I remembered, oh, that's right, he experienced something I was meant to ask him about. And so I waited and I let him get checked in, and then I caught him outside in the hallway, and I said, "Stevens, I heard you experience something interesting last time you were here, and I was just wondering if you wanted to tell me about it." And the color just, it just drained from his face. I won't forget. His demeanor completely changed, and he thought about it for a minute. And he said, "Yeah, okay." He said, "Let's go smoke." Now in the Navy, "let's go smoke" is code for, let's go have a conversation, because especially when you're on a ship, the smoke deck is where the gossip and the stories happen and all of that. So there's a little gazebo, and anyone who's been in the military knows this. Outside of every building on base, there's a little gazebo, and that's what's called the smoke deck. And if you want to smoke a cigarette, you go out there to do it. I don't smoke, but I was going to go stand with Stevens so he could tell me this story. So we went outside, and he told me that the last time he was there, he was on what's called Rover. Now, Stevens was what's called a master at arms. That's the Navy's version of military police, so security personnel, that sort of thing. He was on Rover, and Rover is the guy or gal who, just like the name implies, they're not stationary. They're in a patrol vehicle, and they are driving around all the different parts of the base property to make sure, this gate is locked, and to make sure, this padlock is still in place. And, they're doing their security patrol. So Stevens was on Rover. Now that dirt road I mentioned, that's about a 6 mile stretch that runs behind the operations side of the base. He had to drive that road. Now I said there's nothing back there, and that's true. There's no houses back there. There's nothing. The only thing that's back there is a tiny little water pump station. It's in a chain link fence, and it pumps water up to the operations side of the base. So whoever's on Rover has to drive that 6 mile stretch of road just to shine a flashlight on this one little, pump house to make sure everything's okay. But it's like a lane and a half dirt road, and it's spooky. We used to run back there, when we'd feel ambitious, we'd run 10Ks or whatever, and it's a long stretch of nothing. And in a county that's already very sparsely populated. So Stevens told me that he was driving that road, and it was like 2 a.m., so dead of night. No one's back there in the middle of the day, let alone in the dead of night. But he said that, and he's telling me this story, white as a sheet, smoked like 2 cigarettes this whole time because he's pretty frantic. But he said that he was getting close to the pump station and that he came around the corner in his patrol vehicle, and he said there was a man in the road. Now, that in and of itself is odd because, again, we're miles from the nearest town, and the nearest town had a population quite literally of like 23. It's like Sugar Grove population, 23, 24. So what in the world is this guy doing back here? And he described the guy. He was looking at him from behind. This man's in the middle of the road, slowly kind of shuffling, walking down the road away from him. He's wearing overalls and no shoes. And Steven said had very salt and pepper colored hair. So like a middle-aged guy, overalls, no shoes. And so when he came around the corner and his headlights shine on this guy, I mean, he's only, 15 yards in front of his vehicle. And the guy doesn't turn around. The guy doesn't acknowledge Stevens in the slightest, And so he's thinking, this is odd. This guy's got to be on something or something. Something's not right. And so he just rolls down his window and hollers at the guy. And his first thought is this guy needs help. So he's like, "Sir, do you need any kind of help?" And this guy does not acknowledge him in the slightest, keeps shuffling down the road. So Stevens yells at him again, asking him if he needs any assistance, and he does not acknowledge him. And so at this point, Stevens is thinking, okay, on the right-hand side of the road is the National Forest, but on the left-hand side of the road is the base property. This guy's not responding to me. What is he doing out here? He's up to no good. So Stevens is thinking, I need to escalate my force a little bit. And so he actually puts his vehicle in park, turns on the lights, and gets on the intercom, the loudspeaker that's attached to like police vehicles. And he kind of authoritatively now addresses this guy, "Sir, this is Petty Officer Stevens with the United States Navy. You are close to government property. Stop what you're doing. Turn around," this sort of thing. And the guy does not acknowledge him. He doesn't respond. So Stevens actually opens his vehicle door and steps out, and he's ready to draw down on this guy. And so once he gets out of the car and yells at him outside of his vehicle, he said the guy turned around. And at this point, when Stevens is telling me the story, I mean, he had to stop and like take a serious drag off of his cigarette because he was messed up. He said the guy turned around, and the best way I can describe it is where there should have been a face, there was nothing. And I sat there in silence, and what does he mean by that? I eventually asked him. I said, "Do you mean nothing, just like a blank sheet of skin, sort of nothing?" And Steven said, "No." He said, "I mean nothing like it just sank into blackness. Like there was a void, like there was nothing there." And so it was about as silent as we are right now. What do you even say to that? And he's telling me this. I mean, he's on the verge of tears at this point. His hands are shaking. He's having a hard time even retelling me this story. And I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, what did you do?" And he said he was so gripped with fear. He doesn't know how long he stood there staring at this guy. But he said eventually fight or flight kicked in. He said he got back in his vehicle, and all he could think to do, he found the transmission, put it in drive, and just put the pedal to the metal. And he blew right past the guy or right through the guy. He wasn't sure. He just went flying down the road. He's in shock, and he's trying to get out of there. Well, he said that after about a quarter mile, enough of his senses came back to him where he thought, you know what? There's no way I saw what I think I saw. But there might have really been a guy in the road. I must have misseen it. That must have been my imagination, something, but I might have just hit a guy with my vehicle. And so he said, as hard as it was to do, he said he had to be sure. He turned around and he went back to where he encountered this guy. Yeah, where he encountered this guy in the road. gets back to the spot and gets out of his vehicle. And he's gun drawn at this point because he's, obviously very freaked out. I would be too. But he said he went back to where he encountered this guy. And there's not only is there no sign of this guy, but he said his footprints were there in the dusty dirt road. But his footprints just had walked up a little bit and then just stopped. Just, he could see where the guy turned around to face him, and then there just were no more footprints.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, I'm just, oh my goodness. And I said, well, did you do an official report? He said, no. He said, I got back in my vehicle and I flew back to base. And he said, yeah, I just went back into dispatch, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I didn't talk to anybody. He said, I can't file this. I mean, the military is huge on mental health as it is.
Right.
And it doesn't take a lot these days to get like a medical discharge for mental health. And much of that is very legitimate, but he's thinking, what are they going to think when I come out with this story? They're going to call me crazy. They're going to whatever. And he said, so no. He said, I told a couple people eventually the next morning. He said, but I no, I didn't. I never filed anything official. But how I mean, when you can hear stories and it's easy to say, yeah, right, except for, I mean, I'm looking this guy in the eye. And I mean, I'm seeing his biometrics. He's sweating. He's shaking. He's a mess as he's telling me the story. And it's like, well, why in the world would I not believe him? I mean, why in the world would you make that up? And so that story, that's kind of the centerpiece story from our time in this kind of odd part of the country, was what's known as just, the man with no face.
Oh my goodness. I didn't hear a lot of the details, but now hearing it, that is extremely terrifying and chilling. And like you said, especially given who he worked for, the U.S. government, active on a military base, why would he ever come up with a story like that? It would not benefit him in any way, shape, or form. Oh, and he had to go back. Major props to him for doing that. I wasn't expecting the whole footprint thing to actually tie back in, and those were there. I bet that's when he was like, oh my good God, that was real, and now I can't just pass it off as maybe I'm tired or, whatever.
Right. That's exactly right. That's when it became solidified in his mind. And he, after he left, the story made its way to, and for the life of me, I can't remember her name, which is fine, but I can see her face clearly. There was a civilian woman who worked in the supply building where I had to spend a lot of my time. And she was a local. She was from the area. And she was in her mid-50s when I knew her. And this was, this was before 2010. And so she was in her mid-50s then. But when she heard the story, she sat back in her chair and she said, that is the weirdest thing. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, when I was a little girl growing up around here, my sister and I always had to be on the lookout for these two guys. She said there were two brothers who lived in this area, and everyone said they were crazy. Everyone said they were crazy, and they would wander all of the most remote. I mean, they'd turn up anytime, anywhere, even in the middle of the night. And this sounds like one of those guys, the overalls, the shoelessness, all of that. But she said, but those guys were middle-aged when I was a little girl, And, but she said, boy, that sounds like those guys who used to be here, 40 years ago. But, oh man, that just makes it a little more creepy.
Of course, the no face thing adds a whole nother layer of it. It's tough to call that a human being unless they have some kind of extra ability. I don't know why they would need that ability except to terrify someone. Did he have any ideas of, who would know how to describe that? But did you ask him, well, what the heck do you think that thing was?
We didn't even get to that. He was so just overwhelmed with I'm sure he does have his own ideas. He has to live with this now. He's seen it, and he's got to somehow categorize that in his brain. I'm not in touch with him anymore, but I never asked him what he thought it was. And I don't know what he would say. I mean, what would anybody say? That's a tough one.
Yeah. And he didn't, and I know you're, I'm not expecting you to speak for him per se, but did he mention at all that this thing made any noises at all, or, any movement except for the turning to face him?
No, that was absolutely it. It was walking, but it's kind of a slow shuffle. It was walking, and did not acknowledge him until he stopped the vehicle and got out. And at that point, it turned around. Something about the fact that you kept saying that it was shuffling versus the walking also creeps me out. Like it just couldn't we're not talking like
get the energy to actually walk normally.
Exactly. We're not talking like the mall walkers early in the morning, power walking their way past Sears. I mean they're like a creepy slow shuffle. Ugh. Yeah.
God. And this poor guy. So it's not like first of all, of course, he doesn't report it, which I'm sure we all agreed that is the right thing to do, considering that you work for the U.S. government. But now he still has to drive that road. It's part of his job.
Right. Yes. And I don't, that would have been a good question to ask, because his supervisor, who was a pretty understanding, level-headed guy, he I don't know if he would have, taken him off that watch or not, if he would put him through that again or put someone else on Rover for the night or what. So I don't know. I don't know if he ever had to do it again. I'm not sure. And like I mentioned to you earlier, the base itself is now, closed down. They maintained, a small detachment of civilians still work there, but the Navy itself has been pulled out from all the operations there.
As far as we know, right? At least that's the official report.
As far as we know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Not to get too conspiratorial, but, considering everything that you wrote me in the email, it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of weird stuff around there. So just one last thing about his story. Why did the guy at the gate even bring that up to you? Like, why would he think that you would be interested in hearing that?
I think just because, like in a small town, you form friendships, and it was just kind of a, so I'm not from that part of the country. I'm from the Mountain West, and, excuse me. And there's just a slower pace of life in West Virginia. There's just, and I don't mean that in an offensive way at all. It just is. And so you stop and you talk to people. And, so we just kind of formed a little friendship, and it had just happened the night before. So it was very clearly on this guy's mind too, because he had just dealt with Stevens and kind of helped, settle him down and get him off, on the right foot for the rest of the day.
Poor guy. Get him up out of the corner and try to get him breathing again. That's a horrible story. My goodness. Those are the ones I'm like,
I felt bad.
Yeah.
I know it. I felt bad even just bringing it up with him, because I thought it was I had no idea what to expect. I'm like, hey, did you see something weird? And I thought he was going to say like, oh, well, and I had no idea. I mean, he was, he had a hard time finishing telling me the story. So I felt a little guilty afterward, but my goodness, I'm glad he told me. I've just never heard anything like it. Never heard anything like it.
That is a very unique story. Every aspect of it is interesting. What he was wearing, the fact he had no shoes, the way he moved, the no face, of course, is the coup de grace. But
well, yeah,
that's a bummer. Seeing the guy with the no face, I would hazard to say that's a big on the no list for me. Do you mind sharing what year that happened, or is that a little bit too specific?
No, this would have been around 2010.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness, poor guy. Stevens, if you're out there, I hope that you never saw anything like that again. I'm pretty sure the one time was more than enough.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sure he would agree.
Okay, so I don't know if you wanted to jump right in and talk about the base, or kind of this interesting aspect of the animals behaving so strangely around yonder.
Yes. So that, the story of the man with no face is one thing. These other elements kind of, they kind of just add to the weirdness of the whole area. So I mentioned to you in the email that this whole part of West Virginia exists inside what is called the radio-free quiet zone. And for those who don't know, like, that's a government sanctioned piece of real estate. It's a huge piece of real estate where the government has very strict regulations over any kind of signals that are transmitted. So Wi-Fi is extremely limited. You're not getting any cell service in there, stuff like that. And the reason for that is because, one, the nature of this military base, which is using satellites for something, we aren't exactly sure what the answer they give, or that the official message they would publish, was that the base existed to do, quote, communications research. Okay, I have no idea. I have no idea what that means. Right. I don't know why they need a 3-story underground building to accomplish that, a completely concealed underground building. And I can verify that. I've been in the UGB, as it's known, the underground building. So I don't know. There's just a lot of mystery there. So the Radio Free Quiet Zone, the base being there, there's also nearby what's called the Green Bank Observatory. And that is not military, but that is also a high-powered dish that is listening out into space. For what? Again, I don't know. But anybody can look that up. Look up the Green Bank Observatory. Yeah. So there's a lot of listening going on, and the government does not want any signals interfering with that. So it's just an odd place in general. I'll mention this really quick, kind of while we're talking about the Radio Free aspect of it. I drove down from the base to Sugar Grove, and there was a van there with, I think, Manitoba plates, which is just odd. I mean, we're not even a main town in the state of West Virginia. What in the world is a van from Manitoba doing here? Mm-hmm. And you have to understand, in Sugar Grove proper, most of the people are living very rurally. In Sugar Grove, there's a general store and a Methodist church, and that's it. Like, that's the actual town. Literally, those 2 buildings for the actual town. And here at the general store, where, just very interesting, it also doubled as the post office. And so you could literally mail a package and buy a gun in the same exchange, which is just,
that's a great place.
It's just pretty humorous.
All right.
Yeah, it's West Virginia.
Yeah.
So anyway, absolutely. So I was down there at the general store. I had to mail something, and I see this van with Manitoba plates, and these dudes come out of the general store, and well, to put it plainly, they were very clearly not from around there. they were
However, do you mean?
Like, one dude was, well, my goodness, I'm talking like leather pants and a mesh tank top, sort of.
Oh, wow. It's like Right Said Fred just walked into West Virginia. Huh?
They were clearly very, very artsy. Okay, maybe that's the best way to say
yeah.
it. And I just could not help myself. I said, "Are you guys lost?" I said, what are you looking for? These sorts of things. And who they were a film team who had been commissioned by the Canadian Film Board, I think is the official name of it. They were making an independent film about the Radio Free Quiet Zone because it was such a weird, mysterious place. And like one of the dudes only spoke French. Like, that's how Canadian they were. And they said, we heard there's a Navy base around here. I said, well, yes, there is a Navy base around here. I happen to work there. They said, is there any way we can get on the base? And I said, well, yeah, actually there is, because any visitor can come on base. They'll just probably, there are certain places they can't go and that sort of thing. So right. I said, why don't you guys let me escort you onto base? And then if, I'll see if there's anything we can do for you, sort of thing. So I did. I got them on base, and I had them wait in the admin office, and I went and talked to our XO, the executive officer, right, second in command. And I was like, sir, here's what's going on. These guys are shooting an independent film from Canada, and they're just wondering, is there any possibility, could they shoot any footage of the satellite dishes? And the XO did not even have to think about it. It was like, no, and no. Get them out of here. They shouldn't be here. Like, and we're on the nice side of base. We're not in the super secret, like, underground building part of base. We're in like the basketball court and swimming pool side of base. And he was like, absolutely not. Like, do not let them take a single camera out of their bag. They got to go.
Did that surprise you?
And that surprised me a little bit, because because there are places on public land where you can actually see the satellite dishes from a distance. And so there's not there's not a ton that could be revealed by taking a photo of them, if that makes sense. And so that was kind of odd to me. So I felt really bad. I got them off base and I said, look guys, I said, I can't take you up there, but I do know a spot where if you want to film some like kind of more broad scenery shots with the satellites in them from a distance, I can take you to that place. And that's just on the national forest, public land, all that. So they said, well, yeah, that'd be great. So I guided them up there. We drove to the top of this mountain and they filmed for about 10 minutes. And they said, they were really grateful. They said, gosh, we'll put your name in the credits. And so I gave them my name and all that. And I totally forgot about that film until just 2 weeks ago. I looked it up. It was on Amazon Prime. It's like a 14-minute long film. It's called the Silent Zone, I think. And I watched it. I'm like, yep, these are the same guys. And they totally did not put my name in the credits. So now I'm just mad at the Canadian film. Yeah,
those little punks in their mesh shirts.
I know. Well, they can keep their mesh shirts. That's fine. Anyway, it was an odd film, but if the Canadian independent film scene is your thing, and maybe some people really enjoyed it. But anyway, so that was just interesting that they would drive all the way down from Canada to do a documentary on this part of the U.S. just because it had so much intrigue and there was so much kind of unknown about it, I guess. So
what kinds of things did they talk about in the Silent Zone film?
They talked about how it was interesting. They talked about how people are essentially electric beings. In other words, like, we're beings full of energy and we respond to electricity and down to the level of like, neurons and protons and all that. And they kind of followed this one woman's story who she could not live near she couldn't even live near a Wi-Fi signal because it messed with her body so much because she was so responsive to like radio signals and stuff like that. And so how she had relocated to the radio-free quiet zone to try to find a place where like nothing electronic or whatever would mess with her body is kind of, again, it was only 14 minutes long and it was very, very artsy, so to speak. So that's the best I could track with it, is that we're a lot more receptive to frequencies and waves and all of that than we realize, basically.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So,
so she moved there for her own health, basically, and sanity.
Essentially, yeah. So I don't know what all is going on there. Yeah, I'll talk about the base for just a moment, but before I shift away from the government side of things, I guess. But it's just so there's just a lot of, again, intrigue about the base itself. The Navy facilitated what was going on there, but the NSA was, they were the official name behind it. All the data that was collected or whatever was sent off to the NSA, I think up in Fort Meade, Maryland. I think that's where their headquarters is. And so, but with that said, again, communications research is the answer for what they're doing. And beyond that, I don't really know, because my job did not necessitate that I go in the building. However, I was requested, I needed to go in there on two different occasions. They needed my opinion on something. So I did go in the building, the underground building, on two different occasions, and both times I was under heavy escort. Down to the details of, it wasn't like, oh, go down the hall and to the left. Like, I had a guy on either side of me escorting me down this hall, and I was instructed, do not even look to the left or the right down any hallways that we pass. You couldn't even turn your head while you were walking? They told me the less you see, the better. The easier it'll be on everybody. Like, quite literally, they escorted me to this. And interestingly, they had, what I could tell were very, they had them on hand, obviously, but temporary partitions to block off various pieces of equipment, various corners of rooms, that sort of thing. And they escorted me into the room where they needed me to do something. I did it. And then they escorted me straight back out. This was both times. And here's why that's odd. And I don't want to read into it too much, but on the one hand, I just understand that the government is trying to follow protocol, that they want to, they have to treat everybody the same, these sorts of things, whatever. I get that. I have family who still works for the military, and he at the top secret level. And so I understand that there's integrity that needs to be maintained and all of that. But at the same time, I wouldn't know. What are they hiding from me? What would I see that I shouldn't see? I don't have a category for that, because I know that a lot of linguists were stationed there. So a lot of translators of different languages, Russian, Farsi, that sort of thing. We had a lot of linguists stationed there. And so I'm just wondering, and I can only speculate, but if all we're doing in that building is translating languages, whether it be over phone calls, emails, or whatever, what in the world are you trying to keep me from seeing? Because when you join the military, you have to disclose which languages you can speak, because if you can speak extra languages, you can be of value. If they need a Mandarin translator in a pinch, they look, who can we, you speak Mandarin, come up here or whatever. So they know that I only speak English. And so worst case scenario, I hear a conversation in Farsi, and it's like, what security threat is there to that if all you're doing here is translating?
Right.
And so I can't speculate too much, but that was just very odd to me. That felt like a tremendous amount of overkill, And so and like I mentioned to you earlier, the governor of West Virginia flew out via helicopter to visit the base, and I was talking to the governor at the time. I was talking to his people when they arrived, and they made the comment that he didn't even realize this base existed until they informed him about that mid-flight. And of course, if you're a governor, you're making a lot of appearances, a lot of, you're shaking a lot of hands, kissing a lot of babies, whatever. And so he gets on the flight. Okay, where are we going? What are we up to now? Well, we're going to the base at Sugar Grove. And he's like, what's that? And so again, I don't know that it was intentionally kept a secret from him. I mean, but I don't believe it was. But just that just goes to contribute to the fact that this place it was intentionally very much off most people's radars,
But the governor thing does tie into what you're saying about why is it such a secret if all you're doing is quote unquote communications research and translating, but the governor doesn't know the place even existed. That's interesting. Right.
That was odd to me. Yes, very odd. And so to this day, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. It is interesting though, because of the fact that there is some stuff above ground. So it's not like a totally underground secret base, but the fact that he didn't know about it is also kind of strange, because you think that something would have come across his desk at some point about this. I don't know. That is okay. So before we go on, because I'd like to hear some of the stories about what the locals thought of this place, because you said that everybody had their theories. Do you personally think that the man with no face, I mean, he was walking, of course, on the dirt road right behind the base, so it's an obvious, maybe pointing the finger, but do you think that they're tied in at all?
I don't know. I don't want to let the X-Files do my thinking for me.
Right, no.
But at the same time, I just don't know.
Yeah.
That's hard for me to... And that's one weakness of the story, is that I was not the eyewitness. But I did hear it straight from the witness. I do believe I got every detail, but I just don't know. Did something go awry? Is this the byproduct of something that shouldn't be going on?
It's funny you just said that, because what flashed in my mind when I came up with that question, are they tied in? I was thinking of, and it's not a great movie considering the first few, but Alien Resurrection, when they kept trying to redo Ripley and bring her back, and every time it was just this disgusting amalgamation, and it wasn't quite right, and it took them X amount of times before they got the copy to come out looking like Ripley with some extra bad to the bone qualities. But horrible movie. I hate that one. But that's what it reminded me of. I'm like, I mean, he was almost just right, except he couldn't quite get enough energy to walk properly. Where was his shoes? I mean, there's so many questions, but to turn around and have no face at all, like, somebody let Bob out of the cage.
He could, exactly. He could pass off as human from the right perspective and from the right distance.
Right.
Yeah. That's odd. And I don't know. And the fact that there was no trace of him when Stevens went back, and then my mind ventures into like, okay, is there something demonic going on?
Right.
If there's a category for that's where it becomes pretty much entirely speculative, and just it kind of remains a mystery, I suppose.
Right, because it could have nothing at all to do with the base, like you just mentioned, and something that John Paul Capice and others have said when we're talking about, like you said, something demonic. Not that we're saying that's what this is, because we have no clue. And the words "I don't know" is, of course, the right answer.
Right.
He'll say that when something comes into this world, it tries really hard to be whole, but a lot of times it's just not. It's just not. It's not right. It's messed up. It's got like one arm, or the face is messed up, or but see, this one's a little bit different than most, because it is interesting that just the face was so completely just void and just sunk into blackness. Seems very on purpose to me, but what do we know?
Yes, and I just remembered this. I didn't even mention this to you, but months later, I think like 6 months later, my wife and I were watching some show on Netflix or Amazon, I don't know. But it was basically a show that featured like I don't even remember what it was called, but it was the retellings of people who had like paranormal experiences. And we were watching this episode where this woman was saying how when she was a younger girl, high school age, her and her mother were driving home from volleyball practice in rural Florida. And Florida's just all kinds of freaky.
Of course,
as we all
it's
know.
Florida.
But it fits in Florida. But they were driving home, in Florida, and she said they passed a young girl walking down the road in a pretty rural place, to where after a couple miles, the mom was like, I need to see if that girl needs some help. And the woman telling the story said she just started, it didn't feel right. She started freaking out. Mom, please don't go back. Please don't go back, whatever. So, but the mom did go back. And what's interesting is they drove like 4 miles past her. And then mom turns around, and after just like half a mile, here's the girl. Oh, gosh. And yes. And the woman telling the story said that when the girl turned around and faced their vehicle, I'm not kidding. It was a exact quote. She said, where there should have been a face, there was nothing. It just sank into blackness. Wow. And when my wife and I heard that, we looked at each other and we were like, no way, it's the man with no face. It's like, it's the same phenomenon, down in Florida or whatever. So, but that is the only other, story of that's similar in kind to this one. I hadn't, other than, and I wish I could remember what show that was, but it was some sort of paranormal show. But
maybe somebody can track that down for us. If they do, I'll send it to you. Yes, it's great to be scared and hear a great creepy story, but I mean, honestly, what that must have done to Stevens must have been horrible. And I bet he can't drive down any dirt road, I don't care where it is, at night, and not think, oh gosh, if I come around this bend, am I going to see a guy in overalls with salt and pepper hair? Because I bet he wouldn't be driving anywhere near where he could see the face. But I would hope that he would come across other people like the one that you saw on the show, those two folks, so that he knows he's not alone, and he's not crazy. Right. Having a joint experience with someone to realize, oh, it's not just me. Yeah. That's helpful. That's why, just speaking of the military, the best of bonds are made, in hard times and in wars and in conflict, foxholes and all that. Yeah, absolutely. Just really quick, I'm sorry, I'm always off on tangents. So obviously the word's going around about his story. So it didn't get up to his higher-ups, and he never got questions like from his higher-ups like, Stevens, dude, are you okay? No, the story, no, and that's the sort of thing that once word got around about his story, I think I never heard anything from the top down. And I don't know if it's the sort of thing that they just wanted to write off, or he must have been seeing things or whatever. But as far as I know, there was never any. No one ever addressed it from the top down. Okay, that I'm aware that's of. Good. I mean, or maybe all of you that learned knew. I mean, this has got to stay with you guys, right? Because it could be a career changer for Steven. So that also could be the factor too. Yes, and folks who have been enlisted in the military understand there's a, one, I mean, you're just not allowed to, but there's not, other than official business, there's not a ton of extra interaction between enlisted and the officers. And so the higher brass kind of exist in their world. Right. And the enlisted folks kind of exist in theirs. And so there's something of a partition
but between the two. So
which can be very
good. I think it can be very good. I think for both worlds it can be very good. And so I think that it would have been unlikely that anything ever went higher than someone of the rank of maybe E5 to E7. So
good for Stevens. Good news for him. Or maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe he was kind of like, gosh, I wouldn't mind a transfer right now. I got to tell you,
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Before we get specifically off the base and the theories of it, is what I would really like to know is what some of the locals around there were saying about this place.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So locals had different ideas, I think, and I don't know how informed any of these ideas were, but some of these old timers who were born and raised in that county. I mean, if I'm remembering right, the base was built like in the 1950s, and so there were people obviously still living who remembered when the president commissioned this base to be built, and they just didn't talk about it much. I didn't talk to many real old timers who talked about the origins or the theories behind it. I did meet some people who had ideas from everything to the two big ones were they've got some sort of aircraft in there that they don't kind of like a Roswell situation that they are keeping and studying some sort of alien spacecraft or whatever in there somewhere. Why else would you need a 3 to 4 story, I don't remember if it was 3 or 4, underground building, if all you're doing is translating, so they've got, a ship was one thing, like a UFO, they've got a UFO in there. Was what some people would speculate, but the more common theory, and this was interesting, the first I heard of this, I was actually, I should explain, the nearest town, if you wanted to actually get some go to a Costco or something like that, you had to drive an hour into Virginia to get to the nearest, town of substance, I guess, greater substance. So I was in town and I was in a Barnes and Noble, and this guy came up and was trying to, pitch their e-reader to me, wanted me to buy an e-reader, and I said, no, thanks. I said, I love having actual hard copy books. And I said, the only time an e-reader would come in handy is if I were ever to deploy again, because then you have very limited space and it'd be nice to have an e-reader with, 20 books on it. And he said, oh, you were in the military. And I said, well, yeah, I didn't explain to him that I still am. I said, yeah. He said, did you know there's a Navy base just over the mountain in West Virginia? I said, yeah, I have heard that. And he said, you know what they're doing there? I said, what are they doing? He said, it's part of a tunnel system. He said, they can bring submarines clear in there from the Atlantic Ocean to refuel them and to equip them and to do all these things. He said, but it's part of a tunnel system. He said, I think there's this whole intricate, basically underground tunnel system that the government and the military can use to transport things quickly from one coast to another, et cetera, at like supersonic speeds or whatever, without having to pass through airspace or like use the highway system. He said it's part of a tunnel system. And I thought, okay, that's a new one. I hadn't heard that. But since he said that, he was the first one to mention that to me. And I had heard several other people in the area say that they believe the tunnel theory, that at the very least there was basically an underwater or an underground and underwater channel that led from the Atlantic Ocean clear into West Virginia to do something with submarines.
Wow.
And I don't know. I don't know. But that's what a lot of people thought. They've either got an alien spaceship in there, or this is part of a totally unseen transportation system underground.
Either would be very interesting. Can you imagine the cost of that? Holy smokes.
Oh, I know. Yeah. If that's true, that'd be a pretty big deal. And I there was another podcast, and I can't recall which one, but I heard one episode about the idea of a government totally underground transportation system. I thought, oh, that's interesting. That kind of ties in with what I heard over there at Sugar Grove. So I don't know.
I like that, though.
May never know.
I mean,
Yeah.
Anything is possible. I mean, truly, I'm surprised by very little, except for minute details of interesting stories. But I think anything's possible. I mean, I think also, isn't there trillions of dollars missing, from our budget,
sure.
and who knows what's going on down there. Let's just hope that they did the mechanical engineering of that properly, so that none of us crumble into the ocean under our feet. They're like, that was true what the guy said about the underground tunnels there. Very interesting. So that was, in fact, like you said, the most common theory. So it was mostly those two theories. Yeah. Did you hear any more?
I mean, some I did hear from a couple people, and I don't know if this was just, the base is a mystery, and so they must have Bigfoot. That's where most people go, right? Oh, they got Bigfoot in there. I'm like, oh, well, I guess I can't speak to that. I don't know. But I felt that was more like just kind of the knee-jerk, oh, government's keeping secrets, must be Bigfoot.
Yeah. West Virginia
sort of
Wookiees.
reaction.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but really, the tunnel, the UFO, and a couple people, again, that I probably wouldn't take too seriously in a normal conversation, saying, oh, they got a creature in there. And again, and these were, that one especially was entirely speculative, just like kind of, well, if there's a secret, they must have a creature in there, because that's what happens in the movies. Sort of
right.
thing, so.
Right. Alien bodies.
But I don't know.
Wookiees.
Yeah, floating in like big, I don't know if they're like cryogenically frozen or like in formaldehyde. Who knows? Those sorts of images. But overall, it was odd to live and work there for 3 years and to never be able to definitively say what is the point of this military installation. I mean, I worked there. I lived and worked there for 3 years. I mean, and you could even, because the base property butted up against national forests, like you could hunt on base. I mean, so we recreated all over there. But if someone were to really pin me down and say, hey, what, this is our tax dollars, what is happening at this base? I would just kind of have to sit there silently, because I don't know. I really don't know.
And what's is it a national forest or a national park that's right there?
No, I believe it butts up against the George Washington National Forest.
Okay.
In kind of the very eastern part. And now Shenandoah National Park is not far away into Virginia, but I believe it's the George Washington National Forest in that very eastern panhandle of West Virginia. Very
remote area, and talk about a perfect place for a base. I mean, you're just surrounded by like what you said. It's very mountainous and woodsy, and it's not a place you could just traipse around, of course, unless you're the man with no face, without having a lot of supplies and knowing what you're doing.
Yeah, it's the sort of place that if you're not really from there, you'll never be from there.
Right.
I mean, when you go there and you drive around and you see the family graveyards up on the hill above the house, and you see the old barns painted with the tobacco advertisements and all of that, and you just go, this place has been like this for a long time, and not a lot happens here. And not a lot changes here. And so to choose a place kind of as kind of a snapshot of the past, to choose a place like that for whatever it is, high-end NSA spy stuff. I mean, it's such a weird frontier of two different worlds meeting, I guess. And just really made for a really intriguing place to live and to speculate and to wonder what is really going on underground. I don't know.
Well, and that's interesting also that it keeps saying interesting in this episode. I apologize. Everyone's going to go, oh, how interesting is it now, Shannon? You mentioned that you guys can hunt on base, essentially. And you also in your email said that you had some kind of strange experiences with some little wacko animals acting a little strange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. And now, so just to clarify, this experience was not on base. It was but it was still in this radio-free zone, still in the same county, still just off the same highway. So several miles up the road from the base was this piece of property where I was given permission to hunt. Now where I'm from, out here in the West, I mean, if someone owns land that's good for hunting, they are making money off of it, right? Like they lease it out to a private outfitter who, takes wealthier clients out to hunt whatever. So it's really hard to get permission to hunt private land if you're hunting out here in the West. However, out East, the people just think about things differently. There's very little public land. Everything's private. And I scouted out this piece of land on Google Earth, and I heard a connection. Like, oh, I know who lives there. That's Mrs. So-and-so. She was an elderly widow. She's a nice lady. Just go ask her. It wouldn't hurt to go ask if she'd let you on to hunt. And so I did. I just rolled right up to her house and knocked on the door. And I said, this is who I am. I work down at the base. I really enjoy hunting. I'm a pretty responsible guy. Would you ever consider letting me on here to hunt, to deer hunt and to turkey hunt? Because that's what you hunt in West Virginia. And she thought about it for a minute, and it was just kind of yeah, sure, why not? And so she gave me permission. She gave me the run of the place. It wasn't a huge piece of land, about 80 acres, but it was heavily timbered and all of that. So she let me on there to hunt, and the fact that I was the only one allowed on there kind of comes into play a little bit later on. She said no one had really hunted there since her husband had died years ago. So like, just for example, she had a little bass pond on her property. And I said, how do you feel about fishing? She said, oh, go fish. She said, no one's fished there for years. And so with her permission, I brought 3 or 4 friends out with me who enjoyed fishing. And I mean, we pulled in a bass on every single cast because it literally hadn't been fished in years. And so there's no one is out there. So while I was hunting out there, though, yeah, I had some weird experiences with animals, and I think the last experience I'll share, I think, ties them together. At least it's my theory. Of course, some wildlife biologist is going to hear what I'm describing and saying, "Well, this dude's an idiot. That's totally normal behavior," and maybe they're right. I don't know, but from my perspective, I had never seen stuff like this. But the first interesting thing, and I don't know what to do with this, but my friend Jeremiah and I were turkey hunting, and we came up on what's called a black rat snake. At least that's what they called it there. They're not venomous. They're just big black snakes, and they eat other snakes, and they eat nasty stuff. So people generally like them and tolerate them and that sort of thing. So we were just watching this snake, and it wasn't a huge one. It was maybe 2.5 feet or so. And we were kind of following it, like you do when you see a snake. It slithers away a little bit, and you follow it a little bit. But it realized we were following it, and I have never seen anything like this. But it slithered up to about a 6 or 7 foot pine tree, a pine sapling, and it climbed the tree like a barber pole, like wrapping its way around. Like, it climbed the tree, and it got eye level with us. We're both about the same height, and we're tall guys. I'm 6'2", and it climbed the tree, got eye level with us, and it wrapped its hind end around the center of the tree, like to hold on, and it straight up extended itself out toward us as far as it could, and just stared us down from like 2 feet away. It was weird. It wasn't scary. It wasn't terrifying or anything. It was just completely unexpected behavior. Like, this snake just was a tough dude, I guess, and climbed this tree. Yeah, got eye level with us and just gave us the stink eye until we left. It was odd. That was just odd to me. And so I don't know. I don't know. Maybe that's common behavior for those snakes, and I'm just missing something. But I had never heard.
I've
never heard of such a thing.
Not quite heard anything like that either. And I would welcome any emails about it. Of course, I'm sure it would happen anyway, even if I don't ask. But when I read that, I'm like, you're being sweated by the snake. He was not having it that day. It's very strange. Nope. He was ready to go take a nap or something. But that was odd. But then the next 2 things happened on the same day, and again, maybe these are less odd than I thought they were. But I was turkey hunting. I was by myself this time. For anyone who turkey hunts, they know turkeys are on the same sleep schedule as us. So they get up in the morning, they go to bed at night. So if the best turkey hunting is first thing in the morning. And if by mid to late morning you're just not getting any action, it's pretty safe to pack it in and go home. Okay, I'm probably not going to catch a tom in the middle of the day.
So I'm leaning against this big oak tree, and we're calling every now and then, sort of thing. Anyway, I'm getting ready to go, and I'm thinking about getting up and leaving, and I hear something coming down the trail, and so I pulled my shotgun up to my shoulder, thinking maybe here comes some turkeys, but it wasn't turkeys. It was 2 raccoons, and what struck me as interesting about that, I mean, there's plenty of raccoons in the area, but it was the middle of the day. I mean, I'm like bright, sunny, middle of the day, and here come these generally nocturnal animals, and they weren't just, you've seen footage or in-person raccoons that are kind of turning over rocks, pulling stuff out of a creek, whatever, looking for food, that sort of thing, taking their time, whatever. These 2 raccoons were booking it, like they were booking it, and I remember that because I remember how I kind of laughed internally because they look so funny when they run, because their butts are kind of like up higher than their heads, sort of thing. And I'm like, but I thought, what in the world are they running from? I mean, because they were not stopping to smell the roses. In the middle of the day, these 2 raccoons came tearing down the trail, as much as a raccoon can tear down a trail. And I thought, well, that is really weird. And so I kept my eye on the trail, thinking something's after them. Maybe it's a coyote. Maybe it's a black bear. I mean, there's black bears all over West Virginia, so maybe a bear's chasing them. I don't know. So I waited a bit longer, and nothing came down the trail. Okay, so that was just kind of filed that away. That was interesting. Well, I did get up to leave, and as I was leaving the woods, I came up over this rise, and there's a stump there, and sitting on the stump was this possum. And this was also odd because, again, a nocturnal animal, it's a bright sunny day, and he's just sitting on this stump, but he's like sitting back like on his haunches, kind of like when a dog begs for food. And the possum was staring back in the exact same direction that the raccoons had just come from, like intently staring. And I'm going, what in the world's going on here? Maybe this thing's just rabid and not in its right mind or something. So I made some noise at it. I even tossed like a pine cone like toward it, and it landed right near it. And so it turned and looked at me. It knew I was there. It turned and looked at me for just a moment, and then turned its head straight back to whatever it was fixated on, off in the woods, in the exact same direction these raccoons came from. And I just thought, what in the world is going on here? Like, what do these animals know that I don't know?
Right.
But that's as much as I thought about it in the moment. And I left the woods, and I took off out of there, especially considering, again, this is where it comes into play. I'm the only person on this property. I'm the only person allowed on this property. If anyone's coming in to hunt, like they're coming in with me, and I'm talking to the landowner ahead of time. So I know that there wasn't another hunter or another person out there that was spooking them. I don't think it would have been a bear, because if a black bear is trying to chase down 2 raccoons, he's going to do that pretty easily, and nothing ever came down the trail. And so I just thought, okay, they're just clearly aware of something that I'm not aware of. But I kind of put it out of my mind until that fall when deer season came around. And this is where I think things kind of tied together, but they didn't at the time. I had been deer hunting, and I had another friend with me. He was witness to this, and I am still in touch with him. I should reach out to him and ask him what he remembers from the event. But we had been up on this hill hunting, and did not have any success that day. So we came down off the hill, and we were walking back toward the landowner's house where I had parked my vehicle. We were about 200 yards away from the hill. We had just come off of it, 200 yards away. And it's a calm day. There's no wind. There's no storm. There's no nothing. And as soon as we get about 100, 200 yards away from this hill, a tree came down. Like a tree, like a big tree came down. Not like I think I heard, I'm talking like thunder, like timber, right? Like, here we go. And a big tree came down. And I mean, it startled us. Like we jumped, and what in the world? Was that a tree? Yeah, that was a tree. And it was a big tree. You know, I grew up in a home that I don't believe my parents ever paid a heating bill if they could stand it. Dad went out and cut firewood,
right.
and we had a wood burning stove. He still does, in fact. And so I know what a great big tree coming down in the woods sounds like. This was a great big tree that came down. Now, is it possible that tree had been rotting for decades, and we just happened to be there the moment that the straw broke the camel's back and the tree came down? Yes, I guess suppose it is. I suppose it is possible. However, this tree, there was nothing gradual about it coming down like a slow creek that led to, I mean, like 1 minute it's standing, the next minute it's like boom down on the ground sort of thing. And it was right where we had been hunting. Like it was right where we had been hunting as best we could tell from the noise and all of that. It was on the same hill where we had just been, and down came this tree.
How long have you guys been up there? For hours and hours, kind of sitting and waiting and seeing what came through?
We had been up there for probably like half a day. I think it was a morning hunt, come to think of it. So we were out there before light, and we hunted until about lunchtime, and then we pulled out for the day.
And so before that tree came down, though, I mean, you obviously don't remember anything odd prior to that tree coming down while you guys were sitting out there actually doing the hunting.
Well, nothing odd, but this place was this was a good spot to hunt, and so by that I mean you could pretty predictably, even if you just had a doe tag, you're not going to shoot like a monster buck necessarily in there, but there are deer all over that place, and usually, so if you want to go, but that day we didn't see a thing. I mean, there was nothing in the woods that day, which is why we made it just a half-day hunt, because normally if it's during the rut or the mating season for deer, you stay out all day because they're mating. You could see them at any time in the day. They're running around like crazy. We just hadn't seen anything all morning. So there was no activity in the woods. That's the only odd thing about that morning. And I think, as most people could probably suspect by now, I'm going in the direction of Bigfoot with this. I've heard stories. I think the first story of a tree being pushed over, like as a sign of intimidation, was when I watched, season 6 of Survivor Man, the Bigfoot edition.
Yeah.
That was kind of a game changer for me when I started really giving credence to this. Oh, maybe there is something out there in the woods. And I don't have another great explanation for that tree coming down. I just don't, other than something made it come down, something with tremendous strength and the strategy. I mean, I think it was doing it at us, if that makes sense, toward us. We had just been on that hill. And remember, I'm the first person to hunt this property since the landowner's husband died years and years ago. So I think, personally, something had realized no one's hunting this place. It's a very calm and quiet place, and had essentially made its home there. And I think it didn't like that I was around. And I think it didn't like that I was in there also after the animals, also trying to kill turkeys and these other things. And I think it was trying to intimidate us in that moment.
He's like, I finally, the other guy with the boomstick wasn't here, and now you guys are back, and I am not happy about it.
That's my theory. Yes. Yeah.
Maybe the snake just wanted you guys to take him home with you. He's like, take me with you.
Yeah,
there's some freaky stuff in these woods. Reach your hand out. I'll just climb right up.
Absolutely. Well, and so my wife and I have since kind of become, fanatic is too strong a word, but we've become very interested in the whole world of Sasquatch and all of that since then. And so reflecting back on these experiences, and when you hear stories of, the woods went quiet, the crickets shut up, the game disappeared, stuff like that, I'm going, holy smokes, like suddenly that makes sense, because whitetail deer especially, they don't, out here in the West you have mule deer, and mule deer just run around. They go where the food is. Whitetail they like to stay closer to home. They like to find a spot in the woods that they like, and they like to stay put as much as possible. And so I had seen deer in there time and time again, and then they disappeared. And I know that they weren't getting shot up because I'm the only one with permission to to hunt this place. And so something's pushing these raccoons away. They're running away from something. That possum is alert to something. The deer weren't there in the woods, and then down comes the tree. And again, I wish I could describe to you. I mean, it wasn't like when you find a small tree and you hang on it until your own weight snaps it because it's only like 2 or 3 inches across. I mean, it sounded like a logging operation was going on. A big tree just absolutely shook the woods.
They're the best loggers in the world. Those big Sasquatch. They get her done real quick.
I suppose.
But
yeah.
at that time, though, this was prior to you being into Bigfoot at all? So neither one of you looked at each other and went, oh my gosh, was that a Bigfoot? Like, that wasn't a thought then?
Well, actually, funny you say that, because my friend who was with me, his name is Matt, that's exactly where his mind went. And I'm like, oh, you're one of those nutso Bigfoot people. So I kind of mocked him in the moment. You know, I worked very hard to rationalize it in the moment. And he's like, I don't know, man. There's some videos online, and you got to read these stories, and I'm like, yeah, whatever, dude. You're weird, you know.
Come on,
and now I'm probably
dude.
a bigger nut than he is.
What do you mean,
yeah.
Bigfoot? Let's go and get lunch. Yeah, you're like, oh gosh. And now look at you. You've joined the club. Oh,
I'm down the rabbit hole. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When did you mention because you mentioned that area can be active, but you put in the email that the Seneca Rocks are quite close to that area. And of course, lots of sightings in West Virginia.
Sure. People don't realize, well, I should say people who have never been there, so it's not their fault, but they just don't realize West Virginia has some places that are just an absolute wilderness. It is the only state that exists entirely within a mountain range. I mean, the entire state is completely mountainous. So there are places, especially like in southern West Virginia. I used to bow hunt down there because there are 4 counties down there that are bow hunting only. So because of that, the deer, you know, they're not accustomed to, you know, the sound of rifle shots, and they just get really, really big. So it's a good place to go hunt if you want to try to get a shot at a, you know, tremendous deer. But anyway, down there, the coal and the natural gas companies just own miles and miles and miles of land, and they let you on to hunt. And so you get to the top of one ridge and you look, and it just looks like an ocean of trees and mountains as far as the eye can see. So yes, there are some tremendously remote parts of West Virginia, lots of places for stuff to go hide. I mean, stuff can be born, live, and die in those woods, and you would never know it. A human would never lay eyes on it, because it's not fair to call a West Virginian a flatlander. You know, there's just no flatland.
They've just never been there. Yeah,
right.
It's a beautiful.
So no, I
state.
think it is absolutely beautiful, and I think there's a lot more in those woods than most people probably give credit. So yes, the Seneca Rocks, and people who are big into rock climbing might have heard of that, because it's kind of a destination, I think, on the eastern half of the U.S. But really awesome rock formation, just shooting up out of the earth, really thin at the top. A popular destination for rock climbers. But I do have a friend who lives in that region who is part of the BFRO, and so we talk quite a bit. He has told me that they do a number of expeditions out there, and that they've had a lot of activity out there in the Seneca Rocks area, and that's quite close to. That's about half an hour, 40 minutes from where we lived at the base, so pretty close. Yeah.
And I know that we spent a lot of time, of course, talking about West Virginia, but you guys are in Montana now, and I don't know if you had time or you wanted to share, you know, that final portion that you mentioned. You find some interesting things there in Montana in relation to Sasquatch, right?
If you'd like to hear our conversation about Bigfoot sightings in Montana, along with all other extra content, head to the website and become an insider.
Well, I'm so-and-so. I was given this name by my parents. I've been to such and such a college. I've done these things in my profession. I produce a little biography. Buddha says, forget it. That's not true. That's some story. That's all gone. That's all past. I want to see the real you are now. Well, nobody knows who that is. Because we don't know ourselves except through listening to our echoes and consulting our memories. But then there's a real you, and that again leads us back to this question. Who are you? That is the real you. We shall see how they play with this exam by the koans to get you to come out of your shell and find out who you really are. else. They will say, no, we don't believe literally in reincarnation. That after your funeral, you will suddenly become somebody different, living somewhere else. They will say reincarnation means this, that if you sitting here now are really convinced that you're the same person who walked in at the door half an hour ago, you're being reincarnated. If you are liberated, you will understand that you're not. The past doesn't exist. The future doesn't exist. There is only the present. That's the only real you that there is. The Zen master Dogen put it in this way. He said, spring does not become the summer. First there is summer, and then there is spring. When you settle down in the train to read your newspaper and so on, you are not the same person who a little while ago left the platform. If you think you are linking your moments up in the chain. And this is what binds you to the wheel of birth and death. But when you know that every moment in which you are is the only moment, this comes into Zen. A master will say to somebody, "Now get up and walk across the room." And he comes back and he says, "Where are your footprints?" They've gone. So where are you? Who are you? When we are asked who we are, we usually give a kind of recitation of a history.